Well, welcome back to this week's Seabine International We the People conference call. Now, normally we have our call on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, but this week we had it on on Thursday, which is today, because of my inability to be on. And I was going to move things over to be every Thursday for a conference call, but there's been a certain amount of unrest with that decision, so we're going to probably put it up for a vote where we will do that on the Facebook group page. Well, today I have asked John Carpenter as my special guest interview this evening, and it's because, he posted a video that really affected me deeply. And so I reposted it before this call for everybody, if at all they had the possibility to review it, to take a look at it before this call. And it was something that he had on his personal page. It was about Antifa in Portland, Oregon, is seen harassing and in some cases violently confronting senior citizens while the police are standing down in this video link. And with police being ordered to stand down, it seems to be happening more often than not during various protesting situations. In fact, in some cases, it's been becoming common, and it's very frustrating, not only to the police standing nearby, but also to the citizens that, in some cases, are being, beaten or harassed in various different ways. And so, John Carpenter obviously posted that because of his frustration, and that is what started a conversation that about a number of things. So let me give you a little bit of background on who John Carpenter is. John spent 31 years in the city of Riverside, California Police Department, and his duties included field training officer, narcotics, gangs, investigations, community-oriented policing team, SWAT, school resource officers, patrol operations promoted to sergeant at 10 years, and supervised most of the aforementioned. Excuse me. Eventually, he was promoted to a lieutenant and later a captain. His last assignment as captain was centralized investigations that included special investigation and major crime bureaus, retiring in May of 2015. And the county of Riverside, which is actually somewhat east of Los Angeles, is part of the Inland Empire in Southern California, and it's about 90 square miles, 300,000 plus in population. I'm telling you this for John's background so you understand where his history and experience is coming from and why I chose him to have this conversation. Well, welcome, John. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome, Linda.
Well, there have been so many things, a lot of chaos happening in various different areas, not only with law enforcement, but the laws and rules changing, sometimes lack of law enforcement, many times because of whatever laws that are out there that have suddenly changed. I want to go over a couple of these things, but before we get into that, let's discuss some of the things that we see that are happening generically in a lot of different cities, and then we're going to go into much more detail what's going on in Southern California, which this state is already in the pits of what is happening with everything that's going on because of the people that are in charge. So 31 years is a long time spent in a busy metro area as a police officer, and I'm sure you've seen many changes. Whenever in the past there has been civil unrest, did the police handle it differently in the past? And could you give some examples?
Well, yes, as you explained, the city of Riverside had a unique opportunity of policing the city that I grew up in, so I've seen all the good and the bad changes, over the past several decades. In the past, generally, when we're looking at what's going on, like, for instance, Portland, Oregon is what prompted this conversation. we have to talk about politics. And when I hired on in the police department in 1984, police departments are generally autonomous to where we ran the police department. We kept City Hall. I worked for a city, so we had a city government and mayor and so forth and council people. They stayed out of our business. And we, would work with the community, and we would decide, what the pretty much what some of the priorities were, because we were out there, 24/7. And politics weren't as involved in the operations as they are now. In Riverside, I guess the best example I could use is we had a Taisha Miller shooting several decades ago, in which 4 officers shot an African-American female in a car in a gas station parking lot, and that ended up sparking. That was my first experience with civil disobedience to a larger scale. We had Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson come marching our town, and for the most part, we're still allowed authorities to when I say control, dictate, reasonable time, place, and manner, and it's been tested up through the Supreme Court when we manage civil unrest and protests. And we would work with actually get in contact with some of the protest organizers, and for the most part, it was a cooperative relationship. They didn't want things to blow up and look unfavorably on them. And of course, we didn't want the bad media exposure too. If we're out there swinging clubs or deploying tear gas or things of that nature. So it was more of a cooperative relationship between these type of events and the police. Now, what I've seen transpired over several decades, and I think that recent incident in Oregon is the best example, Portland, is politics tying the hands of police. And the best example is that video that you're talking about. And when I was looking into that further, one thing that hasn't been widely reported, at least I haven't seen it on Fox and certainly seen it on CNN or MSNBC, is the mayor of Portland, his last name is Wheeler, also serves as the police commissioner. And when I read that, I thought that can't be, no way. And I looked into it further, and sure enough, he's wearing both hats. And there's no way you can wear both hats. Law enforcement needs to be separate. If we're going to be unbiased in the application of law enforcement, we need to be unbiased. And certain politics are always taken into consideration, but at the end of the day, we need to make decisions based on what's good for the community and what the law is, not what a mayor or a council person is telling us what we should or shouldn't be doing. The protest in Oregon sparked over an officer-involved shooting, and the irony is you have these people calling it a bad shooting, demonstrating justice for the subject's name was, I believe, Patrick Kimmons. And he was actually out at 3 a.m, involved in a gunfight. He's a gang member. He's a felon. And the police arrive on the scene because they have call of shots fired in the area. And they get into a shooting with him, and they kill him. And, from a lawful shooting standpoint, it doesn't get any cleaner than that. And the fact they're protesting is unbelievable. One problem you mentioned real quick, the advent of social media has given the ability of these radical protesters to mobilize very, very quickly if they want to show up somewhere. And in the video, they showed the one motorcycle cop standing by doing it. And that wouldn't be unusual if he is extremely outnumbered. But then the comments coming from the police department indicate that law enforcement was told to stand down on that incident, which is very, very interesting.
Okay, so they were told to stand down in that situation.
Yeah, what I've read is they thought by letting them, letting them do what they were doing, that it would diffuse more than trying to mobilize a bunch of officers and showing up and kick them out. Now, I do know that Portland, Oregon's had violent clashes with Antifa in the past. I just don't, in this situation, why they didn't mobilize people, why they allow Antifa to take over an intersection and, assault, citizens. And I actually saw one in one of the videos had a collapsible baton, a metal baton. We call them mast. You might see them on the side of police officers' gun belts. But basically, it's about 12 inches long. You remove it and you shake it, and it, extends into a telescoping metal baton. One of them had that. He was waving, swinging it at cars as they went by. The fact that they wouldn't respond, I'm like, that's just unbelievable. But everything I'm reading is, and the one statement from the police department was, hey, we decided not to intervene. And I guarantee you, those directives come straight from City Hall, especially when you got a mayor like that Wheeler guy.
Thank you for clarification with that, because you brought up a number of things that I'm pretty certain are in the minds of a lot of people that are either listening live or on the recorded call. Number one, if you are even here in California or wherever you are minding your own business, you're driving, you're walking, and you're accosted by a bunch of people, and they start to become violent or incredibly harassing, and there are various situations where the police are told to stand down. In some form, it is understandable if the police are going to be outnumbered. But in that case, to call people in to be able to back them up, what did you do as a citizen if all of a sudden you're in the horrible realization that you are on your own? This I could really see turning into some major issues if it's allowed to continue along in these lights. I mean, is this unusual? Is this more common recently?
Unfortunate. Well, part of the good and bad, I obviously want to take yourself out of that situation if you can. Problem is they intentionally surround the car and they stand in front of the car, and if you move forward and hit them, they, all of a sudden they want an investigation on you using your car as a deadly weapon. I actually saw that happen in Riverside. And that's another story, but politics got involved in that one.
May I ask a question?
Mariel, please wait until the end of the call.
I will.
Thank you.
But officers have what's called qualified immunity, like other public safety folks, and literally they can't get in trouble for, as far as lawfully, can't get in trouble for not taking action. But in a situation like that, you may remember the Rodney King riots and Reginald Denny that got hit in the head with that brick, where they had taken over the whole intersection. There are times when you just don't rush in if you're caught unprepared, and because of social media, these protests can pop up real quickly. And so you need to make sure you have, and when they do, and you go in and take action from a law enforcement standpoint, that you're able to, do it safely. And, there are exceptions where, somebody is getting, physically beat up. I mean, you gotta go in there and do your best to deal with that situation. But things like this, that's what I thought. I thought they were maybe just hanging back until they had enough resources, but it doesn't appear the case. It looks like they were just ordered to stand down.
Which is really disconcerting, and because of a number of things that are coming up. Now, I realize that there's a lot of questions that people may have on, what about the rogue cops that are obviously going against law and the rules of the police department and doing measures that are abusive. That is for another call. That is for a different situation. We obviously want these types of officers that are out of control and doing things against the law out of the department. They're also in situations of standing down and et cetera. There's only so much we can discuss right this moment with the way the laws are and the politics are on what we can do about it. This is more or less, this call is to bring awareness and where things are headed if things aren't changed on November 6th, which brings me to my next subject matter. Now, when we discuss Antifa, Antifa is everywhere. Stands for anti-fascist, which is obviously not what they are about. It has been widely seen that people that are protesters with Antifa all over Craigslist, there's all sorts of job openings of, protesting with Antifa that is Soros funded through various erroneous nonprofit organizations that generally lead back to Soros that are funding these protesters to go out in all different types of situations, not just here in the United States, but also in Europe and, other countries. So Antifa is everywhere, and it is part of the Rules for Radicals that was written by Saul Alinsky of developing groups like this to cause unrest and to cause chaos. And so this group that was in Portland, Oregon, was part of Antifa. And they're finding young, impressionable individuals, liberals that have been pretty much brought up in our school systems teaching liberal ideologies. And most of us who are older, I don't think really had the understanding or realization this was going on to such a degree because it was so subtle. But now we are seeing some of the results of that. There is somebody out there that doesn't have their phone on mute. Could you please push *6? It's really causing a lot of feedback.
What is that number again? It's me.
*6.
I have a new phone too. Maybe it's me. I don't know.
Oh, great. Thank you. So fantastic. Now, moving on from there, this was Antifa that happened in Portland, Oregon, and a number of the things that are happening around the country or even around the world with Antifa in attendance, doing whatever it is they do. Now, let's discuss issues with large violent protests like Ferguson, what the police policy is with that, and so on. And we don't need to spend a lot of time on that because I want to get into where California is headed.
Oh, sure. Probably the biggest problem with large protests like Ferguson is misinformation. And again, going back to social media and everything, that was, as you know, is ruled a justifiable shooting. But the original narrative that was put out, hands up, don't shoot, and I believe that where Black Lives Matter spawned off of.
Yes.
One of the incidents. But the problem is once the false information gets blasted out there and even captured by mainstream media, with very, very few exceptions, they run with the original story, original version. And once that gets out, it's almost impossible to put out correct information. And all witnesses, the shooting and everything, witnesses it was later determined, he never raised his hands and the police shot him anyways. He was backing off with his hands raised. It was quite the opposite. And he violently assaulted the officer. And anyways, the problem is you have politics that get involved, and you're talking minority communities. Unfortunately, the local politician is more concerned, with being reelected and keeping their power base than they are with, protecting the community, business owners. They literally think, well, you know what? We've seen it happen. Let it burn. Let them go ahead and destroy property. and there's an attitude I've heard from some that, well, they just need to get it out of their system, and this attitude or this, what's becoming prevalent now is politics entering into the police response rather than public safety being first and foremost when you have an incident like that. It's about to start off. And that is probably the biggest challenge with law enforcement now, and trying to, quite frankly, one of the reasons I never really aspired to be a chief of police and do any of that stuff, because just politics, there's no way I'd be able to put up with the politics. So politics entering in the decision-making, which is not in the best interest of the community or public safety, that's been the biggest challenge.
I think you pretty much encapsulated it all right there. The politics being involved in the decision-making with law enforcement and that type of thing. Obviously, we can see the results of that. And it's being exacerbated by people like Nancy Pelosi, who in 2017 actually gave a speech to mainstream media on how to pretty much give out misinformation and have the media, mainstream media, pick it up and package it, so to speak, and get it out there, which offers a form of credibility in the eyes of the populace. And it carries on a cycle of going out of control over time that then completely dissuades away from what the actual situation is, causing chaos, public unrest. And then you have people like Maxine Waters, encouraging individuals to accost conservatives wherever they may be, whether it may be at the gas station or a restaurant, and all those situations that were in there, encouraging them. Now, I could go on and on. Recently, because this last couple of weeks, a multitude of various different people encouraging violence in some way, shape, or form against conservatives. Now, with the thing that you saw that happened in Oregon, and with the elections coming up here fairly soon on November 6th, it's really getting scary to be out in the street. So I want to go over in a little bit more detail. In your opinion, is it possible that some of these gangs that are out there, like MS-13, are being weaponized along with Antifa, which in my personal opinion, it appears in some ways they are, but also with, now we're going into California, with Governor Moonbeam, Governor Brown has made a number of changes, like not cooperating with ICE, passing laws that release criminal illegals back out into the streets. I'm not just talking about little petty crimes. I'm talking about major felonies, murder, number of situations, back out into the populace instead of to ICE for deportation. And a whole slew of mandates that make the streets unsafe, including the creation of sanctuary cities. So maybe you can give an abbreviated laundry list of what some of the things that California has done that not only are just unprecedented, but how California is being, quite frankly, used as an example of what's going to be happening to other states and eventually even countries if this type of crap is allowed to continue.
Yes, I'll keep it real basic. Anybody can Google Proposition 47 or Proposition 57 to get all the details. But those are the two main props. They were actually voted on by voters. Prop 47 was approved by voters in 2014, and it was followed by Prop 57 in 2016. Now, Prop 47 was basically designating a whole slew of crimes from basically felonies to misdemeanors. And most of those crimes involve drugs and theft. And you thought, okay, theft, a lot of people may think, oh, he steals something out of a garage or maybe a shoplift. No. We're talking auto theft. We're talking burglary. And now what's happening literally is officers, they detain people, and they don't, half the time they're not even going to book them into jail, take them down and process them at the police station, release them with the ticket, because generally you can't issue a cite and release ticket for a felony. But there were a few exceptions of crimes that were more like wobblers, but that's a different topic. But now these offenses, they have been downgraded to misdemeanors. Jails have mandates, as far as capacity and everything, and they're not going to hold, misdemeanors if they don't have to. And so you have all these criminals know it, and they are just, having a field day out there. I speak to some of my property crime detectives. They're inundated. I remember one guy back when I was working in 2014, we had him on literally over a dozen auto theft cases, and he didn't do more than 6-7 weeks, and he was released. And this is somebody that led us on high-speed pursuits a couple of times when he was in a stolen car. And just the way these new laws were written, and quite frankly, Governor Brown and his law firms that they hire for PR and how to advertise these bills, they were advertised as rehabilitation bills. And so that's a word that a lot of Californians like, and they approved them, but they were quite the opposite of rehabilitation. The other one, Prop 57, was basically, it was early release for nonviolent offenders. So you had one that classified a bunch of crimes, 47, from felonies to misdemeanors, and that involved a lot of sex crimes, by the way. So sexual assault, that was generally a felony. A lot of those crimes were reduced to misdemeanors. Of course, I mentioned burglary, auto theft, grand theft, identity theft. I could go on, and just really a shame. But Prop 57 was especially disturbing because we used to be able to consider somebody's criminal history, and when deciding whether or not to release them early once they, during sentencing and everything. But now the Prop 57, a big issue with that was that the judge could only consider the current crime that the person was charged with, could not consider their past criminal history. So this guy went in, he committed a low-grade burglary, but he has a history of assault with a deadly weapon, attempt murder, and all of that, and it's a real bad character. That cannot enter into play when deciding whether or not to release them early.
Oh, this is true. And there's quite a few other laws that you haven't touched on that you're having to do with, let me see. There was one out there, I don't know if Leonard Bacani is on, that he had written an article on it. Leonard, if you're out there, please unmute yourself. But a law, in the meantime, in trying to remember exactly what it was, that if somebody was arrested and, brought into court, they could be released if they were found to have any type of mental health issues. And so literally released out in, pardon me?
That's a new one, yeah. That's correct. That was in the last 2 months. But I don't mean to cut you off. I left out a couple here. Are you familiar with the felony murder law that we've had for decades?
No, I'm not. Please bring me up to date. I'm just going from memory from reading the news.
Within the last 2 months, Governor Brown signed two bills. SB 1437 changed our felony murder law. And the best way I can describe it is if you and I decide to go rob a bank, obviously we're probably going to take a weapon with us. One of us is going to have a gun. And you wait until I go into the bank and do the robbery, and I shoot and kill somebody in that bank. Obviously, I can be arrested for murder. But the felony murder law allowed the driver to be charged for murder as well. And it was really helpful when you had these, and that's a simplistic way of putting it, but working gangs and the conspiracy that having to do with when they plan a drive-by shooting or something like that. Now, they go by, they do a gangs decide to do a drive-by shooting, and everybody in the car knows what they're doing. The only person you can charge for that drive-by shooting now is the person that actually pulled the trigger. The other one now is SB 1391 he signed, and that has to do with juveniles now. We used to be able to try them as adults if they committed a heinous crime. There's only like 32 right now serving time in the state of California they've been tried and convicted as adults. But this was, again, really helpful for, when we'd be working gangs. And now we cannot charge juveniles as adults or try them as adults. So they could go in and could commit a real heinous murder at, 14 or 15 years old, and, they're going to be released by age 23 or so.
Unbelievable. There's also, you have better knowledge of all these laws that are out there now, so I'm truly just going from memory. Wasn't there a law that said that people that were in for life could be released after a certain period of time now? In other words, they may have been tried and given a sentence for a life sentence, but after, 25 years, 35 years, isn't that another law that came out?
I don't recall the law, but I recall hearing something about that. The other problem with the change in the felony murder law is the hundreds, if not thousands, who are serving time for murder. Now that law has been changed, I'm being told by some of my district attorney friends that they're starting to see appeals for early release because the change in the felony murder law.
Okay, and what about situations of illegal aliens who are arrested for very serious crimes, some of them murder, that are not being released to ICE, in fact, are being released out into the community because of sanctuary cities, and et cetera, that they are not being turned over for deportation?
Well, yeah, that's a huge problem. I can tell you that the majority of our jail population are either illegal or, I'm talking the majority percentage-wise. I speak to my friends who still work Riverside County Sheriff or LA County Sheriff, and the majority of their population is, legal alien or, first-generation, Southern, from Mexico or one of the Central South America countries. It's a huge problem, the impact of illegal immigration and crime. A lot of people don't want to talk about that because they think, well, you're bigoted or it's racist to even talk about that. But the impact is huge, and what it's going to take for people to wake up and look at that. I don't know, but I do know that it's a very accurate statement to say that illegal immigration is responsible for a very significant amount of crime in our country. That is a very honest statement right there.
Well, there's been studies done to show that is absolutely the case, and to throw open the borders for anyone and everyone to be able to walk through. Like, country without borders really is not a country. It's just, throw open the doors. Anybody can come in. Anybody, whether they be tourists or, the honest Joe. But the problem is the honest person that is just coming for a better life isn't necessarily the case. In fact, more often than not, it isn't. There have been so many people that we want immigrants coming to our country. We want that. But go through the correct process. Go through the process that has been put into place. It's available. It's there. Many, many, many people are able to go through this process to be able to become citizens, naturalized or, otherwise, of our country. And it's being encouraged. This is the point I'm making right here. It is actually being encouraged. Obama made a statement just before the 2016 election about encouraging illegal immigrants to vote in the elections. And that in and of itself is what is illegal. You are not a citizen of this country to be able to vote in the elections. And so many other different things that is just mind-boggling to me. The encouraging of skirting the rule of law to do illegal activities. It's just surreal to see and watch this type of thing happen. With that being said, John, and we're coming pretty close here to the end of our our discussion where we'll open up the phone lines. But with that being said, as you are watching these things unfold from your 31 years in, working in the police department, and as things evolved in the last couple of years, do you personally see a huge difference in not only the way things were in enforcing the rule of law, but where do you see it going if the Democrats get the House, if they get the Senate? What do you see happening to California?
We'll continue to go down the tubes. I can tell you my friends who are still working in law enforcement are very frustrated right now because they feel like they're chasing their tail, putting good cases together on folks, and, and 2 months down the road, they're dealing with the same person that should have been locked away for a couple of years. And so all it's going to do, you look at that and you look at the issue with immigration and how that impacts, we'll just keep it, the criminal justice system for now, obviously impacts other areas. I see it as a perfect storm. I see continual anarchy. When you look at major universities literally encouraging others to violently stop others' First Amendment right to freedom of assembly and free speech, we got real problems. We got all this. I see is some of it is connected. You mentioned Soros earlier. I agree. I think some of these transnational gangs from Central South America and Mexico, I'm mainly talking to the narcos, I think that's a separate issue with the gangs here, and they got their own thing going. I base that on my years of working and commanding gang units and working FBI task forces and things of that nature. It's kind of separate, but we got a perfect storm coming, and people need to not sit back. People need to be damn near as vocal as the other side's been, if not more.
Well, I think that's an understatement. That is an absolute understatement, that we need to be vocal. We need to speak out and start making a difference in waking people up. And more than anything else, we need to make certain that you get out there and vote the red wave on November 6th, or California is going to be it's going to be the prime shining example of a disaster. And it's just so horrific as things are right now, and increasing. And the only reason it hasn't increased to the nth degree is because there still is a certain amount of the Constitution and the laws that they need to follow. If they don't have free reign, but we get the Democrats into the Senate and into the House, we're just looking at everything being finished off, and it's going to flow just like this to other states, and that's going to be all she wrote. Do you have any?
Yeah, I agree.
Can I just tell you, the situation in Australia is identical. The universities, the police standing down, Antifa, it's all exactly the same in Australia.
Well, we were going to open up the, thank you, Jill. We were going to open up the phones to go ahead and do questions. So, Jill, let's elaborate on this a little bit. Now, I know in Australia you mentioned some things happening before in the past. Can you talk a little bit more about what you're seeing with Antifa in Australia and or the rule of law? Let's educate us.
It's basically the same as what John has described is happening here. The Antifa groups are funded. They turn up very quickly through social media and through the networks. They are paid to turn up. They are paid to cause trouble. They have organised, when there's more time available, they have organised professionally made posters, all identical, and they are sometimes branded with the Greens, which is one political party down here. These political parties have ties to Soros. He funds, or his groups fund a lot of the problem. The police, I've been to rallies where the police restrain the people who are not causing the trouble and allow the left or the Antifa groups to create havoc. They vandalise and they're let to go free. So it's, and universities as well. Free speech or any conservatives are closed down. People who want to speak, either organised speeches or rallies or conferences at universities, are refused access to venues, and they're just not allowed to speak. So we have an identical situation in Australia. So it's not just California, and it's not being stopped. It's going to continue. Thankfully, you have Trump. We have nothing.
Well, that's not necessarily true. This is going to be the beginning, because I think as everyone sees how things are being dealt with here is going to be quite an inspiration for other individuals, especially here now with the advent of social media, and we start doing private forums, which Seavine has started here, where you can have your discussions without censoring. And to be able to get the word out. Now, Jill, what you were saying is a huge eye-opener. I personally know a number of people in Europe. They usually aren't on the call because this is 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning, their time in Europe. But it's the same thing, same exact thing is going on there. It may be different issues, but the bottom line is the rule of law, the chaos, the taking over by utilizing so many different aspects within law enforcement, besides what's going on in the schools and the universities, the indoctrination, mainstream media in all the various different countries, social media being repressed, people, especially if they're conservative voices, being able to talk, is because they know once people get the word out, it's going to pretty much deflate their agenda. And it's happening anyway because of communications now are very different than what it used to be. So thank you, Jill. Did you have anything else you wanted to add? Because, with you seeing what's going on in Australia, what about the farmers? Let's just bring a couple more things up very quickly.
Okay, I'll just be very brief. Sorry, my dog was in the background there making some noise, so I muted myself. But one thing I will add that I wanted to make a point of is the civil unrest, the violence, the vandalism. It's all profitable to the financial elite who run the world. They encourage this because every time there's a carjacking or vandalism or violence, there's an insurance claim, there's compensation, there's lawsuits, there's this, that. It's a money churn. So the violence and civil unrest is pushed and driven by the elite because that makes them more money. So that's just one aspect. Farmers in Australia, like every industry, is being closed down, being strangled. They're being denied water access. They have to pay for water, whereas the corporate giants get given free water rights in a lot of cases. And these are foreign interests given the right to our water, and they can actually, some Chinese-owned huge operations, they actually bottle the water, take it back to China, and we're buying it back. It's ridiculous. And I know this is a global thing. It's all about the wealth redistribution, UN driven. So yeah, I'll leave it. I'll get too worked up. But it's a global thing. You guys are not alone. It's exactly the same everywhere.
Well, I know if anybody has an understanding of what's going on with the UN and everything, is you do. So thank you, Jill. Now, is Leonard Bacani out there yet? I think I heard him come in.
Yes, I'm here.
Sorry.
Oh,
it's okay. Now, can you just briefly tell me a couple of the other laws that you are aware of that we did not touch on that's going on here in California, so people are aware, a lot of people are aware of what's happening?
Yeah, I don't know where, or I don't know what areas you covered, but I did an article a while back about some of the laws. But AB in California, we have Assembly Bill 1810, which allows dangerous felons like murderers and rapists to avoid prison by claiming that they have a treatable mental disorder. And this is something that obviously the progressive Democrats are pushing. In other words, if you can come in and claim that, yeah, I basically admit to the crime, but tell the judge or convince the judge that you have some kind of condition that's a mental disorder of some sort, and convince him of that, it allows you to avoid prison time altogether. And that's just outrageous. And did you guys discuss the law that releases a lifer after the person who has spent at least 25 years in prison and is at least...
We touched on it.
Okay.
Yeah. We touched on it, but we didn't really go over much else because I really didn't understand it. I just knew something about it.
Basically, if they're 60 years old and they spent 25 years in prison, a person like Charles Manson would have qualified to basically be released. People like Melendez brothers who murdered their parents, they could be released in 12 years. And then there's all kinds of crazy laws being passed by the California legislators. Example, it reduces, it used to be a felony if you purposely intended to transmit the AIDS virus to an unknown partner. It used to be a felony. They used to be able to get attempted murder, and if that person died, they would charge murder. But now, it's misdemeanor. Obviously, the Democratic left, this is tied into the LGBT to protect them. And another law that's crazy is the law, new law removed the sentencing enhancements for crimes with guns, for crimes such as rape, sodomy, murder, because, believe it or not, it disenfranchises the wrong ethnicity, if you can believe that. So, like I said, there's just crazy legislation being passed and signed by our moonbeam governor. It's just crazy. We just need to take the once beautiful California back and get this red tsunami, as Q explains, take it back.
Well, there was another law also about underage prostitutes. Please correct me where I am wrong on this. This is purely from memory. But underage prostitutes, children or young teens, whatever the case is, no longer can be taken in. They're just immediately released. So it looks like for the purposes of the pimps or their handlers or whichever the case is, they just basically, instead of frankly getting them help if they were taken to jail and, helping them to be able to find assistance or to go back home if they're runaways or to get away from people that are doing the sex trafficking and they have a fierce handhold on to them. Do you know anything about that particular one?
Well, the one that I'm familiar with, it involves crimes convicted or persons convicted of serious crimes who are less than 25 years of age. It gives preferential treatment to those people because their brains are not mature enough to understand right from wrong, if you can believe that. So I don't know if that's the specific legislation that you're referring to, but that's another crazy legislation.
That's another one.
Yeah. Okay.
No, it has to. This is a specific one about child prostitutes. If there's sex trafficking or whichever, it used to be that they could take them in, and if anything, with foster care or something to this effect, get them help. It was a way to get them off the streets. We're talking underage, 12, 13, 14, younger. That now they won't do anything at all. They just don't do that anymore, and just put them right back out onto the street. Seems to be that there is an underhanded agenda with that one, but you don't know which one I'm talking about.
Linda?
Yes.
Yes, I'm familiar. I work BICE actually, and I'm very familiar with that law. And the unintended consequence, and you explained it very well, is that if we treat them, the underage prostitutes, as victims, then we'll be able to get them help more readily. But actually, that hasn't been the case. What's going on now is there's no incentive for them to cooperate with law enforcement because it's not against the law what they're doing now because of Governor Brown. So what happens now is I'm talking to my vice detectives, and where in the past these underage girls we could kind of force them into getting some help, now we can't. And a lot of times they're not. So now they're not going to roll on their pimp or cooperate with us. So it's actually had the exact opposite of what the bill was intended to do.
Absolutely correct. I've also been hearing about vending machines that distribute syringes or something, so to under the guise of helping to stop spread AIDS or any other problems, or maybe it was what are they called? Things that you snort coke with.
That's another crazy.
Help me out here.
Yeah, Linda, that's another lazy law that they. It essentially legalized any felonial use of narcotics. I mean, I know you guys probably have discussed the decriminalization of certain use of drugs. It used to be a felony, now they're misdemeanors. But this goes further than that. They actually, some cities like San Francisco, they actually have designated locations where you can come in and shoot your heroin or speed in peace, unimpeded and without law enforcement looking over your back, and they're handing out needles, syringes.
That's same in Australia also.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, that's the same in Australia also.
Really?
Yep.
Seriously?
Seriously. They have shoot-up rooms.
Yeah.
Yes. So,
well,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It has unintended consequences. These drug addicts come into the city, and they go to these cities because it's a sanctuary city. You can't get busted for it. The city is handing out these needles in the gist of public safety, but what's happening is it's drawing people from all over to this sanctuary cities for drug users, and of course a lot of these people have some mental problems or some drug-induced psychosis. They're committing crimes. They're defecating in the streets. You're finding that, like the city of San Francisco, they're spending hundreds, thousands of dollars every day cleaning up just a defecation that's out in the streets. So
it's just mind-boggling on how things are going. We have time for one other question and or point of view. We've got many law enforcement on the line with us this evening. If you have something that you wish to add, or if you just have a question, please do so now. We have time for one more question. Push *6 to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I wrote you a note on Facebook. How do I unmute myself?
I got that vibe. I knew it. What is your question?
Well, actually, it wasn't so much of a question as what happened, and maybe a note of hope, maybe. We had a very similar situation in New York under Mayor David Dinkins, where the police were told to stand down, and we had the Crown Heights riots, and the police were not allowed. Well, actually, the Crown Heights pogrom, the only pogrom in America, and the police were told to stand down by the mayor. The result of that was that Giuliani, a Republican, was swept in the following election and took the city from the worst, most dangerous city in the country to the one whose budget was busted because he understood about collaborative pivot, and he undid it all. Undid it all in 2 years, and then we just went up until 9/11. Then it kind of stayed up, and then this new mayor, we have a mayor now he's an admitted communist, and he allows defecation and what else in the streets. You're a nurse. I'm a therapist. One of the reasons that we have so much stuff going on in the streets is that we emptied the mental hospitals back in, the 60s when Lyndon Johnson was president. Psychotropic medication came around, and he sold the doctors or whatever, or whoever, the people who pushed the meds, sold the pulse on, these medicines will make these people just fine. They can function outside of a hospital. The hospitals are old and falling apart anyway. Let them out. And we were supposed to, the federal government that is, was supposed to build hospitals, new hospitals, clean ones, and were homes where they could live, be given their meds in the morning, go to work, and come back, as if they come back, but whatever. That's what they were supposed to do. But you see, they never built them, and they never took them back in. They just let them out loose. So they don't take their meds, and crime suddenly erupted. We never had crime. My mom used to never lock her door in New York City. And we should people to leave. But before they emptied the hospitals, we did not have this crime. We didn't have the drugs, but we had the drugs came right after we emptied the hospitals. So I don't know what California's situation was in terms of psychiatric hospitalization and whether you also released, because it sounds like federal law. It sounds like if Johnson was involved, it was a federal thing. And that may be a situation that's going on here, too.
Well, my experience in California has been, I work a lot of homeless outreach teams and supervise those, it's not so much, some of the vagrancy-type crime, petty crimes and drugs and homelessness is what we saw an increase in. This other stuff's going on when we look at the hardcore crime or, civil unrest. In California, I wouldn't attribute that to, the mental hospitals being closed down.
What year are you talking about?
We've been during Reagan, I want to say. When
that was much later. Johnson was in the 60s.
Yeah, we still had mental hospitals in the 60s in California.
We didn't.
Yeah.
And no, I don't believe. I believe they emptied the hospitals as well because it was federal. It was the president.
Mm.
So I don't know what they did in California because every state is different. But I don't really know. But it would be interesting to know. If anyone wants to do a search on that, because it was the problem in New York. If they had not emptied the hospitals, we never had homeless. We didn't have a homeless population, and we had a lot of immigrants, but we did not have a homeless population. We did.
It's disconcerting in everywhere that this type of thing is going on. We are pretty close here to the end of the hour, and we are going to be cut off if I don't end this call. What I do encourage everyone to do is please go to one of two places or both. We have the Facebook group, Seabine Breaking News Facebook group. where we have a lot of discussion and we have research, investigations, debate about latest breaking news and or new laws being put out to help bring awareness to the public. And then we have the c-vineforum.com, c-vineforum.com, that is off of Facebook, where there will not be any censoring, and you can carry on conversations there without being manipulated about what it is you can and can't say. And we also have different forums on there for the various different countries that people can congregate together to have discussions. That is new. Please start using it. We don't know what's going to be happening with social media here, frankly, in May now. So that is a place, if you have not registered, again, c-vineforum.com, please do so and start carrying on conversations there, because it's going to be private forums like this that are going to probably be the way of the future unless they completely change how censoring is done. As for moving the calls to Thursdays, I again apologize. We're going to have a vote on that. So please, with the C-Vine group page on Facebook, we're going to have a vote put out to see when people would prefer to have it, Tuesdays or Thursdays, and we will go by the majority vote with that. So our next call may be next Tuesday or Thursday, depending on how you guys vote. Well, thank you, John Carpenter, very much for joining us this evening. I mean, you've been very informative. I appreciate you taking the time to speak to us this evening. And thank you for everybody else for your input, and we will see you next week. Good evening, everybody.
Thank
you.
And everyone else.